Thank you, Ben. And Mike, I want to thank you for the big picture. I'm going to sing the second verse of a very consistent song. It is really a delight for me to be here and to realize that I know so many now dear friends in this audience. And if I can get this to work, I'll be a happy camper. Great, thank you. Many people don't know that there is a very large database, research literature on early childhood. It's not in one place, and that's part of the problem. It's not just in the education literature, but it's in the public health literature, it's in the medical literature, it's in the neuroscience literature, it is in the child development literature. It is really very widely scattered, in part because children and how they develop is the province of many different disciplines. And my wife and I have been very fortunate over the years to be in leadership positions in multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research centers where we've had the opportunity to have as many as 35 or 40 different disciplines working together. And it really takes this broad perspective to really understand that there are consistencies that run through molecular genetics, neuroscience, economics, psychology, education, that all add up to where Mike left the conversation. What I want to do is to give you a few facts that you can hang on to, and as you become even more knowledgeable as advocates, you may be able to share with people, because we're in a titanic battle for the future of our country. We're either going to rededicate ourselves to be sure that our children grow up, and by our children I mean all of our children grow up and have bright futures, or there's going to be a pocket in every community, in every one of the 3,000 counties that we have in this country, that is going to be not only a drag on the economy, but it's going to be a drag on the quality of life, it's going to be a drag on safety, it's going to be a drag on everything that we hold dear, while we want to be, can be, and should be that shining city on the hill that we have so dearly cherished as part of our American heritage. So, the programs I'm going to talk about are ones that mostly I've been deeply involved in myself or know a great deal about. They have almost all been funded by the National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development, Department of Education, and others. They almost are all what are called gold standard research programs utilizing what's called randomized controlled trials. And many of them can be considered as basic probes into how malleable human development is. So whether you look at these as sort of basic science probes, or you look at them as applied science, or now their relevance to public policy, they are kind of all those things, sort of depending on what your seat is at the table. So I want to both tell you what I think we know confidently, and then do a little speculation with you about where we might go from here. I'm going to draw upon work from the Perry Preschool Project that many of you already know about, the Abecedarian Project, or you may call it the ABC Project, if Abecedarian is a little bit of a mouthful. I named that when I was a 25-year-old young assistant professor, and like most assistant professors, I had a fondness for obscure and large words. I know better now. The Chicago Parent-Child Center's Project CARE, which is a project that stands for the Carolina Approach to Responsive Education, and the Infant Health and Development Program. These were all programs targeted toward extremely high-risk children, and the question was then, when they were conceived, was it possible through systematic means, relying primarily on early childhood education, to alter the course of development such that you could take the highest risk children and give them a decent shot at participating in middle-class American life. There's a color code to these slides. Red always indicates the children that got the early childhood education. Yellow always indicates the children who served in the control groups. I show you this slide because we have never compared early childhood education to children who got nothing. We've always taken a much more conservative approach. We already knew that health care and social services and nutrition were important. So those were provided to both people in our control group and to people in our treatment group. What we did was, on top of that, add an early childhood education that began essentially at birth. And in shorthand, the red here on the left-hand side of the slide tells you what that education consisted of. Enriched caregiving, an individualized, comprehensive curriculum delivered and tailored to each child each day, and that is possible. Where language had a particularly high priority. Why? Language is our first symbol system. The mastery of that is a great aid in mastering other symbol systems, be it music or math or logic. And from the very beginning, we put a high priority on conversational reading. Not reading at, but reading with. And for those of you who are grandparents, just stop for a moment and think about the last time you read to one of your grandchildren, when you have them on your lap and your eyes are about 8 inches apart and you're reading a book and you notice that little quizzical look and you stop and you have a little conversation about that, the back and forth, where the reading is the prompt. The book is the prompt for these kinds of interactions that are about reading, of course, but about so much more than just mastering that arbitrary system that we call the alphabet. So what I want to impress upon you, these are very conservative estimations of the magnitude of impact. Now, in this one study, the Abecedarian study, we had 112 kids. They were all biologically healthy at birth. They all came from extremely poor families. They may be the most challenged families ever studied. We collected about 10,000 pieces of information per child and family per year, coded that into our computers. We grew out mycoplasma, bacteria. I'm just going to give you a couple of facts. These are children in the yellow who were assessed by people independent of the project, longitudinally, and you see at 6 months, 93% of those kids in the control group are still within normal intellectual limits. That means that they have an IQ of 85 or above. And over the course, between then and 48 months, there's a consistent drop, so that by 48 months, only 45% of that group is still looking within normal limits, compared to the group that got the early childhood education, where we have 95%. So the differences are not just statistically significant. We're talking about really big changes, and I'll come back to the implications of some of those changes before. We also know that certain subgroups are much more vulnerable than others. So even though this is based on a small number of kids in each of the two groups, These are the children born to mothers who had IQs at 70 or below, qualifying them for intellectual disabilities, and mothers who were in special education. They start off looking just like your kids and mine, but by 54 months of age, there's an almost 30 IQ point difference between the kids who got the early childhood education and those that didn't. These aren't, again, small differences. These are sledgehammer effects. And I'll come back to that in a moment. As in this slide, we were able to replicate the Abecedarian study, and we did it with 985 children. We did it at Harvard, Yale, Penn, Einstein, Arkansas, Miami, Texas and Dallas, and University of Washington. We had Stanford to collect all the data. No person ever saw the same child or family twice. We did the training. We built 8 child development centers, run the transportation systems, monitored every day what was going on. And this is probably the most exciting graph that I've ever drawn. We were able to mark that sample off into children whose parents had some high school, were high school graduates, had some college, or were college graduates. The yellow lines show a relationship at age 3. The more the parent is educated, the higher the child performs. We've known that association for now 40 years. Here's something you don't know. That relationship is there at 36 months. It is there at 24 months. It is not there at 12 months. It develops over time in the absence of early childhood education for highly vulnerable children. And what the early childhood education did was to level the playing field. Look at the red bars. The red bars are getting close to the height of the red bar for the children who were born to college-educated parents. It has had a disproportionately positive effect for those children who were most challenged, the children who came, and I can show you the same graph done with mother's IQ on it, or any number of other ways. When you provide high quality early childhood education, you break the relationship between parents' characteristics and children's outcomes. And you can level the playing field, getting very close to the performance of children who come from college-educated parents. This is simply to summarize, to give you a few numbers. Again, all the red is children in the early education groups. Yellow is in the control groups. And on the last column here, there's something ES. ES stands for effect size. And for those of you who've had some statistics background, effect sizes are a difference between two groups measured in standard deviation units. And so an effect size generally of bigger than 0.25, you would consider changing policy as a consequence. So from the Abecedarian program, if we look at age 8 as an example, we have improved reading achievement, math achievement. If we look out to age 15, those continue. We get a big substantial reduction in special education, a big reduction in in grade retention. By the time children who've been in early childhood education are old enough to go to kindergarten, their mothers are more likely to have completed high school, gotten some high school education, more likely to be employed at higher status jobs, earning more money. So you get a twofer. You do important things to young children, but at the same time, you can be accomplishing. This was part of what was used to justify having TANF have requirements for recipients to continue their own education or to receive employment. Effect sizes of 1, this gets covered in the front page of the New York Times. And a reduction of about 75% in special education placement and almost a half in grade retention. That gets the attention of economists. If we look across the early childhood literature, all studies, here's a list of things we can take to the bank. We can increase school readiness, kindergarten readiness. We can increase math and reading achievement all the way into adulthood, reduce special education placement, reduce retention in grade. The children in the Abecedarian Project who got the early childhood education were 4 times more likely to go to college and to graduate from college than the kids in the control group. And they went to college and graduated at the rate that the general population does, about 25%. And as adults at age 30 and 35, the kids who went through are more likely to have higher incomes and have jobs of higher prestige. They're more likely at age 30 and 35 to qualify as being well into middle class. They're also less likely to report marijuana use. They're less likely to be engaged in crime. We just published an article about a month ago, two months ago in Science, showing that the early childhood education resulted in a lowering of cardiometabolic risk. That is, a lowering of resting blood pressure, diastolic and systolic. And when we figure in these returns on investment, this finding is so new that it's never been figured into any of the cost estimates. So lowering the risk for heart disease or stroke or the treatment, in addition to some of us having a vested interest in wanting that to work out, that means there's going to be a bigger return on investment that has currently been estimated by the best economists to be in the range of about 3 to 1 to 7 to 1. Or put another way, Jim Heckman, who's a dear friend of mine, and we've shared all of our data with him, he says realistically early childhood can give you a rate of return that's somewhere in the 10 to 12% range. Especially this week, that looks awfully good, given what's happened to the market. So in last August, there was a big article in Science, the premier science magazine or journal, and it said, well, given that we know this, why aren't we applying it? And can large-scale programs do what some of these small-scale programs have suggested? Well, we have an article that we are working on now, which I hope will go to Science, but I'm taking the liberty of sharing it with you before. We've been working for the last almost decade in Louisiana, having helped them create a statewide program that begins with 4-year-olds that they call the LA4 program. And one of the ways to measure this program is how do the children who have gone through compared to the children who didn't go through when they take the grade 3 and grade 4 statewide assessments. Here, the red indicates the children that had the pre-K program. You'll see a white line through the red. That is the Louisiana state average performance. These are all disadvantaged children almost, although there's a sliding scale fee built in here, but these findings pertain to the children who qualify for free and reduced lunch, because that's where the big payoff is. And what you see is that whether you're looking at English language arts or math, the kids who had the pre-K program do better. If replication is the hallmark of science, these are 4 different cohorts of kids going through. You get the same pattern of findings in each of the 4 cohorts. And while we were doing this, we were also scaling up the program, so we were adding more children in per year. So the argument we want to make is you can scale up and you can get positive effects, and we now have 9 cohorts that have been through here with the same results. I'm not showing you the social studies or the science ones, just in the interest of time. You get the same pattern for all 4 of the major tests. And there are practical consequences. So one of the things that I showed you before was a reduction in special education placement. Well, the kids who went through the Louisiana program are also less likely to be placed in special ed, and they are less likely to repeat a grade. So some of these findings don't require a very long-term perspective in order to realize some cost efficiencies. Some of these occur pretty soon. There have been several programs that have made headlines not too long ago that have not been encouraging about scaling up. Some people read the early Head Start findings or the Head Start findings, and those are not very encouraging. And I think I can tell you why. One, neither of those programs are a uniform program. There are different things done in different places. There's a lot of unevenness in those programs. In many cases, the research protocols were not really very good. There are lots of missing data. So you need to be a little careful when you read some of the findings about whether they conformed to what is a acceptable randomized controlled trial. But the government has one serious fault that it has to acknowledge, and that is it did not monitor the programs and it did not make them do what they said they were going to do. I come out of an aerospace family. A lot of similarities to building ships. You don't do it right in implementation, you don't expect the thing to fly or to sail well, you know. We can do better in running large-scale programs if we just bring good management practices to bear. You know? So, few things in closing. We need leadership desperately. That's why this meeting is so important. We need leadership from business, from academics, from science, from education, across the board. And successful programs really have great leaders. We really need the programs to be run by science. We're in Virginia Tech, we're creating a new program now called Implementation Science PhD, which is about how do you get large-scale health, education, biomedical, big pharma practices to be implemented when we know that they will make a difference if implemented well. These programs are all intensive. You don't get big results from mediocre, lackadaisical, half-day programs. I'm sorry to say that isn't going to cut it. You need really clear protocols so that people know what they're exposed to do, what they are supposed to do, and when, and so that there can be good management practices so that you monitor, and when you need to, you make changes so that you are getting the quality that you're paying for. Lots of strong initial training up front, monitoring, reporting, not with a gotcha attitude. You're doing it because it's what the kids need and deserve. You do it because you can give feedback to people who are working and they will improve their practice. But you can't just assume that people are going to be doing that if there is no performance measures routinely looked at. We always provided transportation in our programs because we knew that poor people didn't have reliable transportation. If you didn't get children to the program, then they weren't going to benefit. That will vary from region to region, but whatever it takes to get participation so that you can expect the outcomes, we need to do that. And then when you gather the information, it needs to have the light shine down on it, examined, reasonable people look at it, you find places where you can improve it. That's not news to anyone here, but some people seem to think that these programs can run almost on autopilot, and we know that that's really not the case. And then we need to give people enough resources to do the job right. Again, drawing upon what Mike said about shipbuilding and what I know from the aerospace industry, you know, if you really want to be competing at the outer edges, you've got to do it really right. And this education for young children is a fairly new thing when we talk about it in the context of groups of children being cared for. It wasn't new to our grandmothers, but we don't live in that time now. And the demographics of Virginia and the demographics of the country are so different from what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago that we need to create programs that match the realities that today's families have. We don't want to train women as neurosurgeons and then say, take 6 years off because the skills go away, or as attorneys or whatever. So I close by saying I think that we have a good, strong knowledge base. It's this and a lot more. And I hope that Virginia will take a major, major lead in the country in doing this in a way that will make Virginia really competitive for the kinds of businesses that bode well for the state and the country. I think we can do it. I think that with Kathy's leadership and Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, we're off to a great start. And so I hope you find this useful. Thank you.